Hello, welcome to Liberty Explored. This is Isaac. I'm the explorer, and today we're going to talk about liberty. And obviously, I chose that word for this channel because of my relationship to it, and I just thought we'd do a little exploration together into what it really means. And if you have anything you'd like to share, go ahead and please comment. Love to hear from you on this. I think liberty is a very deep personal understanding, and it's something that we all have a relationship to in this world, in this life. It's a very old word. It goes back to the Bible. Um, I'm sure it's, as far as the meaning behind it, it must be one of the earlier concepts, because just to understand our place in this life is to understand our freedom of will and to understand that we have choices that we make, where we choose sometimes small decisions and sometimes large decisions that affect us. Sometimes they affect us all throughout our life. One small decision can completely change the course of your life. And that's why it's so important to have good stewardship as a young adult or as a child, to have good parenting, to have a strong family relationship. We learn from our families, we learn from our relationships. And the free will that we have is directly connected to the quality of our life. If we're a slave or we're in some type of captivity, we have less free will. There's still a component, but we have less, and that makes life worse. Obviously, there's more to that, but in a simplistic way, that it is that simple. And also, that ability to choose between good and evil, inherent in our liberty and our freedom, that ability to choose between good and evil is the thing that gives us either a good life or a bad life. Much of what we experience, we create for ourselves. And much of what we choose in the moment, we draw to ourselves almost like a magnetism. If we choose evil, we're going to draw evil from other places. If we choose good, we're going to draw good from our surroundings. And that's a beautiful thing. Let's see here. So the etymology of liberty is pretty cool and interesting. I found some citations here. This is circa 1384 from the Clifford Bible. And it says, "Forsooth, where is the Spirit of God, there is liberty." And the reason I mention that is because there's a direct connection between words and God. Part of the reason we use words is to communicate, is to have community, is to share, but to find understanding in our human experience. And the words that we use require a certain amount of shared understanding between them. That's a completely fundamental part of communication. And how interesting is it that if one goes down the path of studying etymology of words or studying words in and of themselves and their meaning, you'll find that many words have a direct connection to God and to the Word of God. They have a direct connection to defining what is good and evil. Now, me and my friend Fire, we were just going over some of the concepts of admiralty law that predates maritime law and predates our own Constitution and the laws that exist in the United States. It's admiralty law was the law of the seas. And the role of the admiral was to be the judge of good and evil. They were the highest form of authority. And inside Admiralty law, there was a very important aspect to what they were doing for society, for nations, as the Admiralty law was a function of community between nations, a function of commonality. One of the only ones, in fact, because of different religions and different languages. There's all these barriers in communication. It's very difficult when one thinks of being on one side or another, a different nation speaking a totally different language. And how do you define what is right and wrong? How do you define good and evil? And that needed to exist. This role needed to exist for us to have trade between nations. And clearly, when trade expanded and when things like the Silk Road or the different types of ships trading spices around the world, when that existed and when it was first really gaining traction, the need for some type of admiralty law was apparent and very important. And I find it very interesting, at least for me, that inside these words that often stem from these early sources like admiralty law, even the word admire coming from admiralty, admire has a cool relationship to respect of authority and respect for God. So the point being that because this person was taking a role of defining good and evil, ultimately their goal was to create more good and to you never eliminate evil, but to minimize it, to mitigate it, and to create more agreeable communication, to create a path towards trade that was universal and without borders. And inside these old words and old rules, these old laws, there is a concept of good and evil. And just like we have in ourself, we have a very important understanding in and of ourself, of our place, of our role, not only what we create for ourselves, but what we create for our surroundings and our community. And every time we make a choice, we have the opportunity to create good or evil in our families and in our own life, in our community, in our nations. So, just like my friend Fire said, all roads lead to God. And all these laws also stem from a relationship of good and evil and the concept that we're all on a different path and we might find God and we might not. But in and of these words themselves, the goal of them was to use and find commonality, to use a relationship between God to determine what was good and evil, to better steward the relationships of the world and of the nations. Now, free will is a really interesting thing because obviously humans have always had free will. We've always had the ability to reflect. We've had the ability to notice what happens when we make good or bad decisions. And this must stem to the earlier civilizations that we don't even know about. I would venture to guess that the advanced civilizations that they speak of in the yugas, in the Indian yugas, where they talk about previous civilizations that went through the highest advancements that we've ever had, that they were very aware of this concept and the relationship to God. Whether we have a memory of that instinctually or not, I believe we do. I believe that that is part of our ongoing connection, our ongoing lesson as a totality of humanity, as a totality within ourselves. The reflection of the self and the nation, or the self and the family, is obvious. They are one and the same. They are similar and reflect each other with continuity. Every time we make these good decisions, we tend to create good things in our life. Every time we make bad decisions, we create bad things in our life. We need to be able to make and have discussions about difficult topics. Now, the death of Charlie Kirk really has brought up some disturbing behavior around our nation and around the world, but it's also brought up some good and admirable behavior. I thank Charlie for bringing this question to the table and making it more apparent that we can talk about good and evil, that we can talk about what is right and what is wrong. We can talk about misuse of words and relationships of words. Obviously, a liberal does not necessarily represent liberty. And the right and the left are intellectual constructs of the mind, and they don't actually represent people. Nobody is completely right or completely left. Nobody is completely liberal or completely conservative. Nobody is completely good or completely evil. And the same thing exists for nations, and maybe even for planets. Do planets have an intelligence? Does the universe have an intelligence? I think so. I seem to notice a very particular type of reflection among sizes in a type of fractal relationship between the micro and the macro in this universe, where atomic structures seem to be also reflected in solar structures and universal galaxy type structures. It seems like everything follows a system of rules. And I think all these old societies, the ones I mentioned before, whether it's Atlantis or the Lemurians, I think maybe they were more advanced than we are now. And that these cycles of humanity have existed for hundreds of thousands of years. And that no matter what happens, that some type of cataclysm or some type of destructive event that absolutely cripples society and cripples humanity and sends it back to the dark ages and sends it back to the rebirthing of knowledge, to rediscover philosophy, to rediscover epistemology, to rediscover God and our relationship to God. Now, I'm a newcomer. I've only re-found God in recent times. I am new. I was raised Christian, but I got lost and I was a degenerate. I was a person who was capable very easily of conducting evil. I had little reflection, although maybe I've always been pretty similar to how I am now. And I'm very critical of myself. So part of that is my path. Part of this is my world and my understanding. And the things I seek to share with you are nothing more than my own limited knowledge and my desire to express myself, my desire to find community, and desire to find agreement with other people, because it feels good. It feels good to have some friend that you can share the depths of your wisdom with, or some unique realization that you might have on a day by day basis. At one point, I had this friend, his name is Paul, and let's say around 18 years old, I remember we were sitting in Los Osos. And one of the things we were talking about at that time was entrainment and how we all rub off on each other. And we talked about how if you come into a situation where everybody's super angry, maybe a group of people, at this point we were talking about music and we had this drum troupe, and everybody sometimes would just be resonating a type of anger or negative energy that made it hard to get things accomplished. While we were studying the drums, we were studying Afro-Cuban drumming. And that was a very interesting conversation as we went through this concept of entrainment, because we were talking about how when everybody's angry and the way it rubs off on you, that is not set in stone, that is not a forced reality. And in fact, we were exploring the possibility of manipulating people for the good. Now, why is that interesting? Because of the concept of words like authoritarian or fascist being inherently bad. Now, when a father teaches you a lesson like to not cross the road or to look both ways before crossing the road, as a child, that's a very important lesson that we all need to learn. And that comes from an authority, our parents, that tell us that. That's a good thing. And authoritarianism isn't inherently bad. Really, the only thing that makes it bad or good is the discernment between good and evil. And so, and since we are all part of the human condition, we're all susceptible to this. We're all susceptible to overusing our own authority, or to underusing it even. And there's times, I think, in this world and the way that we pamper children where we definitely seem to maybe underuse it. Maybe a little bit of stewardship of the child is good. Maybe it's needed even. And maybe we've lost our way by understanding our relationship to authority. And I'm about to go over this word fascism in another video. But in this context, I also want to bring it back to what it means to be a person who has an authority over oneself and to make choices that lead us in good or bad directions. And I want to talk about, just for a second, about murder. And because of what happened to Charlie Kirk and all these people dancing on his grave, and yes, there were many, a lot of people don't want to admit it, there were many, and there was a type of coded language happening at that time, right after his death. And people were even using their community as a type of shield. And this is a sad state of affairs when people do this, when there isn't enough stewardship of what is good and bad to where people feel enabled to even declare outwardly their celebration of someone's death. That's cruel, and it's evil, make no doubt. And everybody does it. We all do it on some level. I'm also guilty of making all sorts of mistakes in this regard. This brings me to this concept of what's happening with free speech right now. And I think free speech is an absolute concept. We need to take the judgment out of words, and we need to allow for speech. At the same time, we need to encourage stewardship of authority towards good. So, inside of journalism, I made a post yesterday saying journalism used to be about integrity. And I think that, like when I was growing up, there were certain words they just wouldn't say in the news or on TV. And there's these guidelines that they wouldn't even say bad words, like slang and stuff. There was a whole bunch of words. George Carlin famously had that list of words that you couldn't say on TV. And pointing that out in a satirical way was actually quite funny. However, afterwards, after we've come to where we are today as comparative to the stewardship of having an authority over communication and a stewardship of words that are said, that are expressed, that are shared, we've lost something. We've lost a little bit of the good. And I think it's okay that people get fired for their speech, because we're talking once again about good and evil, and just the fact that that many people felt enabled not only to dance on Charlie's grave and to make all sorts of weird memes and to write songs even. Yo, your homie's dead. Got shot in the head. Stuff like that. That is some dark, sinister fucking shit. And it disgusts me. And also, I think it's allowable. But I do get to have a parenting type of view over it, and it is wrong. Absolutely. It's not helpful. We're not helping anybody by, that's not the kind of free speech that we need. Although to maintain free speech, see, this is where our founding fathers were so damn smart. To maintain free speech, we need to allow that. And at least from a law-based world. So in this, from a law or in this Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, this is the reason it's the first one, the reason our founding fathers were so smart to make it this way, is because freedom of speech is a type of absolutism. It has to do with the fact that words by themselves don't carry good or evil. They're actually just communication tools. They're tools for understanding. And when we get into communication, with the root calm being related to all sorts of things that I appreciate, like community, commerce, communes, commitment, all these things that are calm derivatives are relationships to ourselves and the whole. And that's fundamental to all religions. It's fundamental to the human condition and to duality. And inside this duality, we need to develop our own internal guide. We need to develop a sense of good and evil, of right and wrong. And we need to cut like a knife through our different perceptions of right and wrong. So as we go through life, we need to ask ourselves this question: what is good and what is evil? On a day-by-day basis, we need to remove the temperature that we apply to words, because they shouldn't have a temperature. They're neutral. The whole purpose of words, it's bizarre that even the censorship exists on platforms like YouTube, even Facebook, TikTok. there shouldn't be censorship of certain words. That's absolutely ludicrous. It's stupid. And when it comes to people in positions of journalism or of professional writing, they need the ability to use these words so that they can effectively communicate. And then it's up to us to discern right from wrong. It's up to us as individuals. And hopefully we can come from our hearts more. Hopefully we can come from a good place where this world is an emanation of the best of our ability. I had this belief when I was younger that I've never let go of. This is part of something that I developed at an early age, and that is the concept of doing your best. Now, doing your best, that is a real deep thing. The reason why it's important to me is I believe that once you're doing your best, there's really no guilt. Like, let's just say you make a mistake, but you're truly acting from the best of your ability and the best of your wisdom and knowledge, everything you've accumulated to this point. The beauty of that, the beauty of doing your best is a lack of guilt. You really can't feel guilty. And if you do, you're really missing the point. You're mistaken. It's a waste of time to be guilty over something when you're doing your best because there was never any better you could do. Now, I don't believe many people in roles of authority currently are doing their best. I think that there's plenty of room for guilt with those people. I don't believe they're making a declaration to do their best. They may outwardly, but I don't believe they are on an internal level. I don't believe Jimmy Kimmel is doing his best when he misrepresents the shooter for Charlie Kirk's killing. I don't believe he is. I don't believe he was doing his best when he celebrated the cancellation of Tucker Carlson from Fox News. The same thing that's essentially happening to him right now. He thought he was dancing on the career grave of Tucker Carlson, and clearly the hate and the misinformation that surrounds the outrage between parties, between political ideologies, is something so overwhelming that people find themselves consumed by it, and they really step into a position of dark energy, of sinister energy, of sin. They are definitely not doing their best either. And it's okay when these people are let go. It's okay because ultimately that helps to create a stewardship of good and encouragement of people to do better, to recognize that all issues are a reflection of the individual and the whole. And just because they feel righteous and prideful in their own position does not mean that they're correct. Now, when the founding fathers had this free speech concept in mind, it was a very deep thing that I'm sure they must have discussed over and over and over again. And it took a long time to deliberate and to delve deeper into how to best accomplish this. And they gave us some tools like the First Amendment, like the Second Amendment. These tools that they had were part of a reflection of understanding the difficulty of the individual making this choice. The fact that this would come up forever and ever into the future, that this was part of the human condition, and I'm sure they had references of this happening forever into the past. So I think we need to remember that it's good to use the tools that we were given by our founding fathers. It's good to remember that not to question them as much as to question ourselves and how best to do our best, how we accomplish what we want in life. Going back to previous civilizations, I do think they had a better way of doing it if they had achieved greater heights of advancement. And by that I mean civilly. Is it possible that capitalism isn't the greatest system ever invented? Absolutely. Is it possible that communism gets a bad rap because it exists in a capitalist framework, or it exists commonly under dictatorial rule? Absolutely. Is it possible that an older civilization that reached a height of advancement had a type of communism, a type of compatibility of understanding, maybe even language that was different than ours? Absolutely. Is it possible that they, through this better system, achieved a type of system that was better than what our founding fathers gave us? Absolutely. However, at least in the context of today and in how we move forward with the right now, that seems to be the best system ever created. It seems to come from the inspiration of God. It seems to be connected to enabling us to have liberty and to have freedom and to have a connection with oneself that is good. And I want to bring up really quickly the Four Agreements. So I thought the Four Agreements is a really useful tool. And one of the things I liked about it when I first learned this was that I found that, well, one, it comes from, this is a more ancient system than our Constitution. This is a Toltec wisdom, a type of spirituality, a personal growth system that embodies another formula, another way of living, a code of conduct, a code of ethics, a type of morality embedded in humanity and in being. So let's go through it really quick. Be impeccable with your word. Do not take anything personally. Do not make assumptions. And always do your best. Whoa. Yeah. So, of course, I had a connection with that. One of my formulas that I developed throughout my life to always do my best, I was happy to discover was an ancient wisdom. Pretty cool. I think the Toltec authoritarians and leaders who came up with this probably weren't the ones who came up with it. It probably existed before. I think all of these concepts existed before, are part of a cycle of humanity that we go through over and over again. It's a challenge for us. It's the beauty of the life condition. It's a beauty of the now and the uniqueness of our time. And it's always been the beauty of the now of that time. So let me quickly go through why these are so cool. So be impeccable with your word. Interesting. That's the first one. That has a lot of relationship to our First Amendment. Impeccable with your word. That's a great word. What does impeccable mean? Impeccable is in accordance with the highest standards of propriety, faultless. So that is connected with our First Amendment and freedom of speech, because that highest standard is exactly the concept of looking between the discernment of right and wrong, good and bad. The only way you can have a higher standard is to discern good and evil. The higher one is good. So when one is impeccable with their word, what happens? What happens in your communication? Well, you create more good relationships. You create more, you foster more agreement between people. You argue less, or your arguments have more succinct meaning and direction, and maybe even are like you might be arguing for good, for instance, with somebody who doesn't understand that they're on a bad path, on an evil path. An argument in that context is completely necessary. An argument also is not a bad thing. It's just a form of communication where you try and get your point across because of the desire to create more good. At least from a Christian perspective, I believe that to be true. And also from this Toltec perspective, I believe they understood this. The next one, do not take anything personally. That goes back to the concept of freedom of speech once again. It's as if they had this inherent freedom of speech in their philosophy, in their wisdom that they shared. And so obviously, you can only take something personally if people have the ability to say things that are hurtful. And sometimes when somebody makes a generalization, they're really not talking about you at all. And in fact, most of the times when people are making any statement, they're talking about themselves almost unilaterally, almost 100% of the time. So when we take things personally, we create barriers to understanding and agreement that don't necessarily need to be there. We create these barriers that stop us from finding the good together in our community. And also we harbor resentment, and we might have to shelter our heart, shelter ourselves from the outside world because we're misinterpreting the actual reality of what's happening. And in that way, it's not healthy. It's not good. It's good to develop a thick skin and to have sayings in the back of your mind like, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Or to have a statement like, I think at this point we can agree to disagree. Now, do not take anything personally also has a very deep meaning as it relates to freedom of speech because, like I said, if we don't allow for things to be said, if we don't allow for debate, then we can't really go on this path of self-discovery. We can't find our own convictions. We can't find our own teachings. And isn't it true that every person is on their own path in a unique place? The duality of life, as is taught by Taoism, is inherent to the human condition. And in fact, we learn through this Eastern philosophy that the duality is actually a necessary component to the oneness. In fact, we almost need to thank the evil for existing so that we can find good, and for the good to exist so that we can find evil. We need to thank people who are on a different point in the path, whether they're finding some dark path through even a religion. Like there's dark aspects of all religions. There's dark aspects of Islam that seem to be seeping in through much of the Western culture that isn't healthy. It's not helping. A lot of those Muslims hate Westerners. They hate Christianity and they seek to destroy it. A lot of Zionist Jews hate Christianity and hate the Western world, even though, or they seek to control it. There's so many, basically every religion has this. But once again, where we're at on the different spokes of the wheel, all those positions and places of learning that are unique to each individual are necessary. We all need to be in our position of uniqueness. We all need to understand ourselves and to find our path of self-discovery. So I thank anybody who's on that path in a different position. Coming back to the record player, it's as if we're all part of the record that's spinning around. It goes around in cycles, and we, as those grooves, we're so groovy. We're groovy people. We're groovy people on this record. But those record grooves that are on the opposite side, I'm not supposed to ever be there, right? My role in this beautiful music being allowed to be presented, that's played, like the word there, play. It's played as if it has a fun element, right? Play is fun. And you play the record as the record needle moves across our groovy grooves. It goes through my groove. And as it gets to the other side of the record, that important person who exists over there in his groovy self or her groovy self, it needs to be there just as much. And every awareness is part of this groovy record. And together, all of our symbiotic relationship and the placement of this beautiful system, this beautiful, grand, intelligent design, makes music. And that music is something to behold. It is something to be in awe of. Awe is a great word. Awe is what I would define as the state of wow. Wow is maybe my favorite word in the world. One of. I love saying wow. One time I was experimenting because I had read so much about DMT, and I was able to extract it myself with my friend, and we made some DMT, and I'd read about it so much I really wanted to experience what that was. I knew it only lasted for a very short time when you smoke it, and because I had made it myself, extracted from some bizarre Brazilian bark that was bright purple. And just even the making of it itself was like an alchemical ritual that made me go, wow. And every part of that experience was, had a component of wow. But when I got to the point where I was actually going to try it, this was many years after I had learned about DMT. And I knew that DMT was a chemical that's released in the brain. I knew that DMT was the chemical that's directly associated with REM sleep and with dreams. So I knew that there's something really close to the human biology, that we metabolize DMT extremely quickly. And because of the fact that we create it within our brain. And I knew that when I was about to have this experience, not only that it wasn't going to hurt me, partly because I had made it myself, I knew that it was safe. I even went through an extra stage in the chemistry extraction process to make sure that that DMT was safe to consume. And it's quite wasteful when you do that, by the way. You burn off a lot of the DMT because there's a lye used in this acid-base extraction, a chemical process. So I knew that it was safe. Now I went over to my friend's house and I thought, hey, maybe just keep an eye on me while I do this, because even though I've come to the conclusion that it's very safe, I'd never done it. And I just kind of wanted someone there to make sure nothing bad happened. So my friend said, "Hey, I'm not gonna do any of that, man. That looks crazy. So I'll just let you try that." I was like, "Okay, no problem." So I sat there and I took a couple hits off that DMT as instructed by Terrence McKenna, one of my all-time heroes. And I was seeking to create an experience like I'd heard from Terrence McKenna. I wanted a little piece of what he described. Now, after you take the hit of DMT, something very interesting happens. It's a very bizarre smell. It smells like burning plastic. And so after taking the hit, you're immediately hit by this, overwhelming smell of a type of disgusting, almost burning plastic smell. And it may have been that I burnt it too much. I mean, there's like a vaporization, a burning of it, where it would create more of a certain smell or kind of ruin it. But in this context, so after I took that hit, and it takes a couple seconds to take over your mind and to give you this experience, the first thing I said was, "Wow." And then I said it again. I said, "Wow." And my friend Jamal, like, he peeks over through the room and checking me out for a second, and I know he's there. I can sense him, but I no longer see him, and my entire visual reality has been rewired, and I'm seeing something completely unique, and it was like being an explorer and being dropped into a world that you had no understanding of and no clue what was going on. Everything was new. And I even said it again. I said, only even more expanded. I said, "Wow." And after that, of course, Jamal wanted to try some. So I thought that was a funny experience. And coming back to this wow and this word wow, and tying in with the human expression of words and why we need to be able to have freedom of expression. So that was a bit of a sidebar there. Let's go back to these 4 agreements. The third one was do not make assumptions. So it's kind of related to don't take anything personally, but it's a little bit deeper, and it has again to do with freedom of expression, because it also has to do with misunderstanding. So why do we need to understand words better? Because it's so easy to make assumptions when somebody else is talking, so easy to take things personally. It's almost as if those first 3 are an encapsulation of our founding fathers' need to put in the First Amendment. I find it interesting that they only have 4 agreements. I also find it interesting that it's not called laws. These are rules. These are agreements that we make with ourselves and with each other. So to not make assumptions has deep connotations because it goes to the foundation of creating better understanding of words together. When we misunderstand words, we don't look them up. We easily make assumptions. I find it on a daily basis. I'm talking to people. It just seems like a lot of communication is riddled with assumptions and taking things personally. and with people not being impeccable with their word. And the final one is always do your best. My favorite, one of the most interesting ones for me, because I already knew this without even ever hearing this. And to always do your best is such a valuable lesson for life and an agreement with oneself. It is absolutely a personal agreement. It doesn't matter to anybody else whether or not you do your best, or they might take some level of pride in friendship that you do. But it absolutely is a independent, personal agreement that we make with ourselves. And in fact, all of these ones, I like that the 4 agreements is less about what other people do and judging other people than it is about making agreements with yourself. See how the agreement precedes the judgment? And in the same way that law precedes judgment, well, actually, agreement might precede law. So there's something very wise about this Toltec wisdom. And when you encapsulate all 4 of those together, you have a set of tools that make you better, that make you a better person, make you a better communicator, and make you a more successful life experience. So I want to wrap it up by talking about honesty. And honesty is one of those things that encapsulates all 4 of these agreements. So being impeccable, because we think in words, being impeccable with our word is a form of honesty. And in fact, when you combine all these together, what you end up with is honesty for yourself in the way that you look at yourself. And that also has to do with judgments. So when all these people do things like celebrate death, they're really not being honest, because they're not following through on the agreements that we make with ourselves all the way through to other people. And I think the best example and the most difficult to bring up, most controversial, is murder. Murder is a loss of agreement with our connection to what is good and what is evil. Murder is one of the worst sins. It's one of the worst acts of human behavior. And a lot of our current propaganda that's being thrust upon us, that comes from people trying to control us, from psyops being played on us on a day-by-day basis. It goes on and on and on and on and on. And one of the goals of these psyops, one of the goals of these people trying to control us and divide us, is to sell the worst of humanity as a good thing. And a great example of that is, and I'm sorry to say this for some people, but it is abortion. So when you look really deeply at murder, when you look really deeply at abortion, you're going to find that because we do have science, we do have an ability to know. We've come to great strides in science. We have the ability to know that life begins at conception. The second that sperm cell hits the egg from the woman, both of these single cell organisms, one finds the other, and a blast of light has been discovered to emanate at the moment of conception, a tiny little burst of light. And isn't that meaningful? Isn't there something there more than meets the eye? The concept of trying to use sophistry to sell murder as a higher good when it comes to abortion is evil itself. Using the concept of trying to tell people that it's a good thing to kill your baby for any reason is a bad thing. Now, of course, there are instances where I agree with abortion, that it's the right thing to do in states of safety for the woman, for the mother. There's all sorts of thousands of cases a year where that comes up. But the fact that we murder 1.03 million children, babies, every year in the name of liberalism or feminism or disguised birth control, we are robbing the opportunity for those young humans to live a life where they can make their own for agreements, where they can find their own path through the discussions of life, the difficulties and the highs and lows, the triumphs. I love that word, triumph. Such a great word. I love the Arch of Triumph. I always love these giant memorials and buildings that are dedicated to triumph, the apex of humanity. All that is being robbed from these young children, and that is sad. I'm anti-abortion. I agree with the Catholic Church, and there's many things I have fallen away from the Catholic Church, but I think I'm finding my way back in many ways. I think they're right about abortion. I think we should abolish it because it's not truly being honest. And I know feminists have gotten all in a tizzy about me. They've attacked me, try to get me kicked out of my band, try to ruin my life in whatever way they can, because I bring this up in a way that for myself is honoring the four agreements. I'm trying to do my best. I'm trying to be honest with myself and with others. I think that having a conversation about murder, having a conversation about abortion, is okay. It truly is. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with having some authoritarian rule when that rule is stewarded by Christian values. Turns out most of our founding fathers were Christians. What do you know? No wonder there's some enlightenment inside these values. I find that there's an attack on words that are meant to dehumanize community and humans within the community who support Christian values or any other religious values. And I want to talk or leave you as my final word with the concept of community and what that is and how that relates. It's one of the most needed things. And inside communities, there are hierarchies. Those hierarchies may have some type of leadership. Oftentimes, men are at this role. Men are often better leaders because we're not as emotional as women. Women have built into their being an emotional construct. That's part of the beauty of what they bring to the table. Sometimes they have more compassion. Sometimes they don't. Men are slightly more balanced in the way that we deal with leadership roles. This has been statistically proven that women, when in leadership, kings and queens, for instance, queens are more likely to create wars. Men are less likely. This is why I like to talk about the value of the patriarchy, the thing that feminism seems to be missing. I like Andrew Wilson's discussion on force doctrine. Ultimately, men enforce all the rights. So every right that everybody exists under or thinks that they have, because it's written in our founding documents. I mean, I really like that it is written in there, actually. And I believe women have lost the concept. They've forgotten that men have a certain underlying kindness in giving women their rights and enforcing them. It's always men who do the enforcement. Anything else is, I mean, I'm all for everything the way it exists and equal rights and egalitarianism to an extent. But we have to remember that inside any community, inside a family, exists this very simple construct of leadership, and men serve a certain role and women serve a certain role, and that's okay. It's good. It's okay to allow a patriarchy to an extent, right? To this extent that it exists, it's good. We are kind men who create less wars, who who fight for Christian values, who created the very rights. All those things were created by men in our founding documents. So that's why they're called the founding fathers. It's okay to remember that. It's not a fight against egalitarianism. It's not a fight against equality. Just like you can't fight racism with more racism. Now that we have gotten to this point where white privilege seems to be the main talking point when it comes to racism, that's just another form of racism. We've gotten away from slavery for quite a long time now. We need to recognize that the reason we were able to do that is because of the documents that we created and when we say that those rights were given by God, that's a deeper meaning. That's a value that we need to come back to. We need to come back to allowing God in people's life. We need to come back to valuing it. We need to recognize that the relationship to God is directly related to doing your best. It's directly related to concepts of the Constitution and how we built that. And anyway, that's it for today. That was a pretty long spew. I hope everybody's doing great. I hope you remember to love your neighbor and love your brother, love your sister, love everyone that you can, and love yourself. God bless you all. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Really helps me out. And I'd like to grow this concept as we share our truths with the world. I'd like to grow this channel and get this out to more people. I'd like to talk more about words and how they are unharmful and how they can be used for harm, but that words by themselves are not harmful. And I'd like to appreciate everybody for them being on their path in their life, in their unique position, whether it's good or evil, for whoever you are. Thank you for being you. This is Liberty Explored. I'm Isaac the Explorer. Talk to you next time.